The Zach Lavine injury news, in which we learned that he will be undergoing surgery and will miss the rest of the season, was yet another twist in the Lavine Bulls saga, one in which had started the beginning of the season when it was first reported that both Zach and the Bulls would be open to finding a new home, and this of course on top of all the other uncertainties and question marks surrounding this roster and their future. Will Lonzo Ball finally be coming back next season? Will the Bulls be able to retain Patrick Williams as he is set to become a restricted free agent this summer? Will they opt to extend DeMar, who becomes an unrestricted free agent, or will they look to trade him before letting him walk this summer for nothing? And of course, none of this helps when the Bulls are having yet again another underwhelming season, sitting in that land of mediocrity with no end in sight. And with the trade deadline just days away, and with the news that Zach will be missing the rest of the season, which all but closes the door on a potential trade for him, it got me thinking, where do the Bulls even go from here? What is the next step for this team, not only just for this upcoming trade deadline, but for this offseason and beyond? And honestly, I actually had a hard time putting this video together, because even in putting together scenarios and directions that the Bulls could take from here on out, I quickly realized there really isn't much they can do. The Bulls are pretty stuck in the situation they have found themselves in this perpetual state of continuity, of mediocrity. So bad that even if they wanted to get out of continuity, it's actually going to be more challenging to do so than you think. How, you might ask? Well, let's dive into the specifics in this video. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, when the Bulls decided to make swift changes at the trade deadline in 2021, in which they brought in Nikola Vucevic, Daniel Tice, and Troy Brown Jr., it was clear then that the new regime under management wanted to make this team their own. They wanted to create their own roster, their own direction, and that was further established when in the offseason the Bulls added Lonzo Ball, Alex Caruso, and DeMar DeRozan, while getting rid of Lauri Markkanen, Thaddeus Young, Garrett Temple, Tomas Satoransky, among others. By the end of that season, there were only two players who remained from the previous regime in guard packs, and that was Zach Lavine and Coby White. And of course, we all remember what the start of the season was like. The Bulls were off to some of their best basketball we had seen since the early D Rose years, and were looking like they were right on their way to becoming contenders in the near future, with everything clicking for this team and being well balanced, well designed of a roster, until it wasn't. And this was mainly exacerbated by the injury to Lonzo Ball and then later on Alex Caruso. And despite DeMar having a career season, even his heroics eventually wouldn't be able to bring this team to what we saw at the start of the season, and the Bulls would fall dramatically in the standings, going from being to the top of the East to finishing 6th and getting beaten badly in the first round to the Milwaukee Bucks. But here's the thing, even though you knew that the Bulls had a disappointing finish to their season, you knew that there was still a sense of hope, with Lonzo Ball presumably coming back the following season, hoping to see progress from some of their younger guys like Patrick Williams, Coby White, and Adesumu, and hopefully the Bulls would make additional free agency signings or trades to further bolster the roster, because it was still clear that even if Lonzo came back healthy, this team still had issues and weaknesses they needed to work out. But ever since then, since the end of that season, the Bulls have made one trade, just one, to trade into the draft to get Julian Phillips, and have made minimal free agency signings in that time frame. Now, it was pretty clear going into this season, even from the start of Media Day, that this was it. This was the last chance for this core to figure things out. The players knew it, the fans knew it. We knew that if we saw more of the same thing from the last two seasons, there was no way the front office could conceivably keep this thing together and try to ride out this wave of continuity and just hope that the team flips a switch and starts playing like we saw at the beginning of the 2021 season. And when we saw just how bad this team looked to start this year, still struggling from the same problems we've been talking about for over a year now: lack of shooting, lack of ball movement, slow pace, heavy half-court ISO style offense, we said, okay, this is it. We're finally going to see some changes. And early on, we had that hope of it happening with Zach Lavine wanting to be traded. We thought, okay, Zach's going to be getting moved. This likely will be a trickle-down effect of the Bulls blowing it up and going full rebuild by trading Vucevic, DeMar, and Alex Caruso and embracing the youth movement. But then what happened? Zach gets injured, the Bulls turn things around and seemingly start winning without him. Zach's trade value gets hit massively when there were already questions about his impact on winning, to now his team looking like a completely different squad with him being out. And of course, now there being questions about his health. So we went from a situation of, well, Zach wanting out isn't the worst thing because we already weren't winning with him. If anything, we'll be able to get a solid return for him, and we'll finally end this godforsaken era of Bulls basketball that we see before us today. We went from that to then saying, well, this sucks. Teams aren't interested in Zach Lavine. there isn't a market for him, to the point where we started thinking, hell, the Bulls might end up just having to move Lavine in a salary dump and take on expiring deals just to free up that cap space. To now, with the news of Zach missing the rest of the season, we're in a situation where it's more than likely Zach Lavine is not going to be traded at the deadline, and the Bulls, in addition to Lonzo Ball, are sitting with $60 million of dead money on their books for players who will not be suiting up for the team for the rest of the season. But this is what is the most concerning as it relates to the Bulls' future and where they take things from here, because for all intents and purposes, we're going to assume the Bulls aren't going to be trading Lavine between now and the deadline on Thursday. I'm even going to go as far as to say the Bulls aren't going to be making any moves by the time we pass the deadline. Maybe some small moves like trading Drummond or maybe Torrey Craig, but that's about it. So you go into the offseason still with the same core, DeMar, Zach, and Vooch. And while normally you would say, well, okay, if nothing happens at the deadline, this is the Bulls' opportunity to make big changes in the offseason. Here's the problem though, and we briefly talked about this in a recent video when discussing the Bulls' salary cap situation going into next season, but the Bulls as of right now have a little over $130 million guaranteed on their books for next season. Really, it's more like 125 because of partial guarantees and a team option for Dalen Terry, but more or less you're looking at $125 to $130 million committed. The salary cap next season is projected to be $141 million, with the tax line being $172 million, which we'll call a hard cap for the Bulls because the Bulls never go into the luxury tax. Now, at $130 million, that effectively leaves the Bulls with just $11 million before hitting the cap and $42 million at their hard cap, the most the front office is going to be allowed to spend. But the $130 million guarantee next season doesn't factor in two key players who are set to become free agents: Patrick Williams, restricted, and DeMar DeRozan, unrestricted. I mentioned this before, but wherever you stand on the Patrick Williams love-hate spectrum, he's going to be getting paid, whether it's by the Bulls or some other team. He's likely going to be getting something in the range of $18 to $20 million a year because of his two-way ability and potential. And the Bulls are going to have the ability to match any offer sheet he receives. Now, depending on the most recent injury to Pat and how long he'll be out for, that could impact the kind of deal that he gets if there are concerns about his long-term health. But regardless, you have to come up with money for Pat on top of the $130 million already committed. And then DeMar, I mentioned this before as well, this is going to be his one last final big payday before he retires. He's still playing well. He's still a strong enough offensive player, and if you're getting Pat at $20 million, the max you're going to be able to pay DeMar is $22 million per year before hitting the tax line, and that doesn't even include filling out the rest of the roster spots. Because Drummond is going to be a free agent, you wouldn't be able to keep him at that point. This likely means Terry Taylor is gone, who is on a non-guaranteed deal for next season. I mean, for Drummond and Taylor, it's a bit inconsequential, but the point here is more so the fact that if you're using your remaining cap space on re-signing Pat and DeMar, that's it. You can't make any additional roster moves to effectively break this cycle of continuity. And the other thing I don't think a lot of people understand is you hear a lot of people saying, well, just don't re-sign DeMar or Patrick Williams. Easy. Then you free up $42 million worth of space to sign other free agents to round out the roster. The problem is, by letting Pat and DeMar walk, you lose their bird rights. You can't go over the cap to sign free agents from other teams outright unless it's via a sign and trade. And so the Bulls in this instance would only have $11 million in cap space to sign other free agents if they don't re-sign Pat and DeMar. That's it. You're talking one, maybe two mid-level type players. That's not moving the needle for you or changing anything as it relates to continuity or mediocrity. This is why trading Zach for expiring contracts was so critical, because it removes $40+ million off your cap sheet for the next 3 seasons and would give the Bulls so much more flexibility in still re-signing and retaining Patrick Williams. But also signing other players or making trades for other prospects who might be soon up for a payday and the Bulls actually having money to be able to afford them. And with the Bulls more than likely not being able to trade Zach at this point, they find themselves in a situation where they're kind of stuck. Now, here's the only way that I see out of the Bulls being in this perpetual state of mediocrity and continuity, and so much of it hinges on Lonzo Ball. Either one, Lonzo Ball miraculously comes back healthy and is just as good as he was before, which gives the Bulls a new look, a more cohesive team on offense with a smart, savvy, great court vision level point guard. Or the other way, Lonzo doesn't make the progress in his recovery that we were hoping for, and the Bulls apply for medical retirement, deeming the injury career ending, and they're able to wipe his entire $21 million off of their books, clearing the way to give the Bulls enough meaningful space to sign another high-quality free agent or two. That really would change everything in terms of finally ending this cycle of mediocrity. Because if the Bulls are able to do that, they no longer find themselves in a situation where they feel like they have to re-sign DeMar, because they won't be getting a ton of cap relief by not re-signing him, given how close they are to the cap anyway. In other words, effectively a bird rights trap with DeMar DeRozan. If they wipe Lonzo's salary off the books, they let DeMar walk, now you're in a situation where you actually have considerable cap space and flexibility. You move on from DeMar, maybe you look to trade Vucevic for cap relief, given he'll only have 2 more years left on his deal at that time, and then finally, you end this era of Bulls basketball and you start focusing and prioritizing the development of your young guys, embracing Coby White taking the lead on this team, giving Ayo and Pat more run, letting Dalen Terry develop and grow, same with Julian Phillips. Hell, whoever the Bulls draft in this upcoming draft in 2024, which could end up being a lottery pick, getting off Lonzo's contract is sort of that first step in the process of getting out of this never-ending state of continuity that the front office continues to try and justify to themselves. Now, of course, the other approach is the Bulls actually do the unthinkable and tear this thing down. They move DeMar and Caruso at the deadline, their 2 most valuable assets at this point. Maybe they even try and trade Vucevic as a loss if it means getting out of his contract. They figure out what to do with Zach at a later time, either during the offseason or at the next trade deadline after he comes back healthy and hopefully ups his trade value a bit. That would really be the quickest way to pivot and go in another direction, or at least actually picking a direction. But I think this scenario is very unlikely. The Bulls haven't given any indication they're even willing to trade Alex Caruso or DeMar DeRozan. They love both of those guys and they value their leadership and professionalism and their high-level play on the court. I can't see a scenario in which either of them is moved to a different team in the next couple of days. I think the most likely scenario, and the answer to the question of where do the Bulls go from here, is the season plays out with this core, they make the play-in, maybe squeak into the playoffs, they get off the final year of Lonzo's contract, they don't re-sign DeMar as a result of it because of the cap flexibility they've been able to afford themselves and no longer are put into a situation of a bird rights trap where they feel like they have to re-sign DeMar. Things trickle down from there and we finally see an end to this era of Bulls basketball and begin a new day, a new chapter. Just my thoughts though. Let me know what you guys think. As always, be sure to subscribe and I will see you guys in the next one.